Hello everyone and welcome. Yes, my name is Arrowfire and welcome back to a bit of a special episode because we're in the season. Yes, TFNation, Europe's biggest Transformers convention, is only 1 month away, and I thought about doing a My Top 5 wants from TFNation, My Top 5 moments from TFNation, which I have done before. But I actually wanted to talk about something that happened at last year's TFNation. Now, with it being the first big TFNation, big convention that really had happened since restrictions of lockdown were all lifted, and it was great to get everyone together, there was a bit of a special panel moment, when in fact there was three, that was talking about the unreleased script of 1986. Transformers the movie. This was carried out by Kris McFeeley and Jim Sorenson with some great digging around of archives of scripts, draft editions and pre-written dialogue that never made it into the final cut and is actually quite far-fetched and quite different to the film that we got. With it nearly being a year from that great insight into what could have been, I thought I'd relive some of the moments and do my own better justice to the great job that Kris and Jim did at TFNation 2022 in lieu of it coming up probably again at TFNation 2023. I will do this a bit whistle-stop compared to what Kris and Jim did at TFNation last year. There were 3 separate panels with breaks in between, going through the mass amount of dialogue and changes to the script and all the things that didn't make it into that final 80-minute brilliant film that we all know and love. So I'll quickly go over some of the bits today. So straight away we look at the movie poster and you can see some noticeable differences. The characters are different yet familiar. We get to see a lot of early drawing board of these characters. You still see a Unicron, you still see the new wave of Autobots, and you still see new guise of Decepticons with some familiarities put into it. Some characters really were the backing for new characters to come. You can see some early templates that really will come to pass later on, but the movie poster more or less goes the same. There's still this ultimate fight against a dark evil. So more or less we start off, there is still a battle at Autobot City, and there is still the Decepticons catching the Autobots off guard, and whilst it's still kind of the familiar introduction of the characters we know and love, you do see some very different characters along the way. So we have, of course, Hot Rod on the far left, looking more or less Hot Rod-like and maybe doesn't have quite the starring role in this. You have Tanker, which is an early incarnation of Cup, who actually transforms into a World War II inspired Sherman tank and is a grisly old warrior. We have then Magnus. Now you can see this is an early use of the template of the character design for Orion Pax in Delta Magnus colours. He's just referred to as Magnus in this instance, in his more kind of the city commander, but if you like, a younger, inspirational, noble leader. There is again an early incarnation of RC, we're again very fembot and almost Elita 1-like looking, and then bog standard Wheeljack, he's there for the ride. Now in this, RC is very much Wheeljack's assistant, and we'll say, going through the script, and I won't go into it too heavily when you read the dialogue, again, women's rights is not getting a big showing here. There's a lot of talking down from Wheeljack to RC. There's maybe a nice moment that the two could have a bit of a fling going on, and he almost gets a bit embarrassed, but there's very much the dumb broad towards RC kind of comments in this script that didn't really make it to the end. But the characters are there that we know and love, with some noticeable difference, particularly when you look at Cup. And with the attack that's happening at Autobot City, whilst it more or less goes the same way, the Autobots do make an arrival, or rather Optimus Prime and the reinforcements do make an arrival, but not by a shuttle, and instead by train. And this is arguably one of the highlights of this script. So Optimus Prime, along with some human counterparts, and I won't spend too much time on them, but turns up on a train. Now, the script goes on the train that is just powered with Cybertronian rocket fuel. Optimus Prime gives the command to the train rails to transform. Phase 1. This then knocks the Decepticons out of the sky, particularly Starscream, and then turns into a Japanese-inspired bullet train, along with more rocket fuel and some massive jet thrusters. This is showing that the Autobots have a bit more up their sleeve and they're not quite as caught off guard as we see in the final script of the '86 movie. But we're not done yet. After this, Optimus gives the command when the Decepticons are all scattered on the ground to say, "Rails, transform, phase 3, and proceeds to turn into this massive Cybertronian snake. Now, these are all artist impressions, and I will put all the artists to the best of my abilities that I'm aware of who have done this artwork for the unreleased script. I'll put their names all up at the end. They've done some great jobs, but that is a fantastic sight to see the approach to Autobot City and this fantastic looking gold snake that is a train turning up all that rocket fuel acting as its body, and you can see Optimus and Megatron squaring off at one another. This was Rails. This is what we could have got. Maybe we could get one day. It never happened, but this is what Rails could have been. And you get the impression this would more than been a match for Devastator. The battle at Autobot City wages on, and some other characters are introduced. This is a new character called Chemico that the Autobots have, and inspires a very cut-looking bodysuit to him, but it's really just a ton of chemicals, which I guess would be acidic to other Transformers, but isn't much more than his own one-man band, heavy artillery that the Autobots set out to defeat the Decepticons with a bit of chemical warfare. But then later on, we also see introduction of more characters. Now we see the Dinobots are off at this kind of sub-base further out on Earth somewhere. You see the introduction of Blur, a bit of an early concept here, but the character in the middle is their tactician or their scientific bod of them. This is Mentlar, and this is really an early incarnation of Perceptor. Doesn't look anything like him per se, but the characteristic is shining through. The scientific, the tactician, the smart thinker of the group. And whilst it's a bit of a sub-introduction and certainly not what we saw with the Perceptor character, this is how they're introduced in this version of the script. Springer is also introduced into this, but does not have really the rugged or the wisecracking characteristics that we know from the character. Instead, that is shared much more with a human character, which in the latter script and what we get in the final movie really gets merged into the Springer character that we know and love today. Battle wages on as we know, the heroes come and go, and as Optimus falls and on his deathbed, rather than opening up and passing on the matrix of leadership, in this version of the script there is an essence of Optimus Prime himself that leaves the body and takes the new refuge inside Magnus, becoming Ultra Magnus. There is a part of this that actually makes a fair bit of sense. It is passing on an essence, but it's going to upgrade instantly, doesn't it? You think about when Ultra Magnus takes the Matrix in the final script, he doesn't particularly change, he just carries the Matrix along. Now, okay, maybe he wasn't the chosen one, maybe that's why Hot Rod becomes Rodimus and Ultra Magnus doesn't change, but when you see this soul being absorbed by what is left of Optimus Prime to then become Ultra Magnus. Physically he doesn't change, but we're led to believe there is a step up, there is an upgrade to the character, making him new leader of the Autobots. A similar yet different thing happens back in the throne room on, I guess, Cybertron, what would be where we would see Starscream's coronation. There is of course an argument ensuing about who the next leader of the Decepticons would be, and a brawl breaks out. Megatron's lifeless body gets more or less decomposed, his spirit leaves his body and goes largely nowhere, and the Decepticons are kind of left with no leader at this point. But we still get the introduction of Galvatron, and of course this is the toy colour Galvatron that is kind of constructed a bit separately and arguably not from Megatron. This is a brand new character, and yeah, he's still quite as maniacal as we're led to believe, but he quickly takes over the leadership of the Decepticons with not too much reason as to why, but let's be honest, they weren't in a position to be picky, so yeah, another lunatic will do. So now we go back to Earth, and rather than being at Autobot City, we're at the Ark this time, where the Autobots decide to construct a big shield when the Decepticons attack. However, as the Decepticons attack and the Autobots are trying to fend them off, Unicron himself intervenes and powers up the Decepticons. We see the likes of Starscream, Skywarp and Thundercracker get upgraded to be much more Galvatron-inspired Seekers. These are somewhere between the original Tetrajets, or if you like, the original Seekers, and Sweeps, but somewhere in between. They are inspired by Galvatron, their new leader, powered up by a cosmic-powered Unicron. It's at this point that the humans and Autobots are trying to work together to come up with a defense grid to go around Earth, knowing that the threat of Unicron is coming. The script goes on, and whilst the parts of it don't change too much, you do see the introduction of the Junkions and how they look. And I won't touch on how they look quite so much, but they are an early version of the Junkions that we know, and you kind of get the impression that they created Unicron as such. They were building him to be their own weapon, their own servant, their own base. This is very much ahead of Primacon being the creator of Unicron, and how the Junkions would effectively go into business for themselves. We do see the Sweeps, of course, in a bit of an autonomous form. They're sent after the Autobots and the humans, and they are a bit mindless drones. You see here they've got a much more black and sinister interior to them. They look quite cool for what they are. They certainly look a bit more intimidating than the blue, purple, nameless creatures that we got to see in Season 3. And then surprisingly, we do come to a death scene in this. Galvatron does take the essence of Optimus, killing Mentlar, Blur and Ultra Magnus in the process. So we were off to killing people fairly early on into this. And of course you had to know Hot Rod would save the day and gets into fight with Galvatron, however does not take all the credit. Yes, Ellen comes in her exosuit to dropkick Galvatron, knocking him away and getting the spirit of Optimus Prime once again. And it is in fact her son Daniel who opens up the spirit of Optimus, which blows up Unicron as we expect, much like the Matrix, and saves the day at the end. And in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. What do you guys think? Is this better or worse than the movie script we actually got? For me, it's certainly got its moments. The summary that we heard when Chris McFeeley gave the speech on it is that the feedback from the first draft is that this was unscriptable or unwritable, undrawable, wasn't able to be put into final production. And I think when you look at it, whilst the artistic impressions have been fantastic, I don't think, some of these would have been very hard to put into an actual motion picture. I think some moments around Autobot City would have been quite good. Seeing some of the new characters could have been quite interesting. I like the idea of a second wave of attack back at the Ark with a defense screen being built and something around Earth. The standout inclusion is Rails, the train, the snake train. This came away as one of the highlights of TFNation last year, and everyone's been calling out to get an action figure or a toy collectible of Rails, and that would be fantastic. It's a great image. If we got anything like that on a Titan scale, would be amazing. But saying that, I do think in the final script, where we have the matrix of leadership being passed on from Optimus to Ultra Magnus and ultimately to Rodimus Prime, that's probably a better tale than the essence of a Prime in a bottle jar. But yeah, we see the death of quite some of the older characters, and we see less so in this one. We see Starscream get coronated and blown to pieces, and Starscream gets blown up a lot in this, but he doesn't necessarily die for good. We don't get the mass extinction of characters that we got in our version of the 86 movie. So maybe arguments for both, but it's quite interesting that nearly 40 years later to find out there was such a radical change to it. The script that we never saw come to life and see the light of day. And that was the highlight of last year from TFNation. It was really great to see it, and they can see why it was divided into 3 segments. There was so much to go through, and what didn't make the final cut. Really interesting to hear. And there we go. So yes, TFNation is coming up in about a month's time. I am super excited. I cannot wait for it. I'm really in the mood for it now. So if any of you are there and want to come up and say hello to me, by all means do so. I'd love to meet you all. And I hope if you are coming there for the first time, you will enjoy the experience. It's a really welcoming, relaxing atmosphere with so much going on. I do recommend you see all the guests, all the panels, go and see all the artwork in the forge, in the trader hall, and just socialise in the bar as well. Whether you drink alcohol or not, it's a great meeting place to just talk. Common theme of Transformers. But thanks for watching, and as always, I will see you on the next one.